from Uprising, historical novel by Margaret Peterson Haddix. Yetta. Yetta was listening for the bell on the time clock, waiting to finish her day. It was a Saturday afternoon in March, and the spring breezes were back. She'd heard them rattling the windows when the machines were shut down for lunch. She knew that, as soon as she stepped outside, they'd tease at her hair and tug at her hat. This year, the breezes seemed to carry a slightly different message. Another year passed, and what do you have to show for yourself? So you can read English a little bit better. So you handed out a few suffrage flyers. Do you think that that's enough? What would ever be enough for Yetta? I think they set the clocks back again, the girl beside her muttered. It's got to be past quitting time. And that's why we need a strong union, why we need a closed shop, Yetta muttered back. The girl rolled her eyes at Yetta. Don't you ever give up? She asked over the clatter of the machine. No, Yetta said, but she grinned at the girl and the girl grinned back. And Yetta thought maybe, just maybe, they'd inched just a little closer to the solidarity Yetta longed for. This girl's name was Jenny, and she was new. The bell finally rang, and Yetta and Jenny both stood up and stretched, reviving cramped muscles, unhunching rounded shoulders, stamping feet that had gone numb on the sewing machine pedal. I'm going dancing tonight, Jenny said, mischievously tapping out a rhythm on the floor. What are you doing? I don't know, Yetta said. I haven't decided yet. Bella and Jane had been nagging her to go visit Rahel and the new baby, a little boy they'd named Benjamin. Bella and Jane had already gone once, but Yetta had had a cold then and only sent her regrets. Well, really, I wouldn't want the baby getting sick because of me, Yetta told herself. Maybe I'm not well enough, even yet. I bet that Cutter who watches you all the time would take you dancing, Jenny said. All you have to do is just... She pantomimed cozying up to an invisible man, gazing up adoringly at the invisible man's face, fluttering her eyelashes. Yetta blushed. There's not a Cutter who watches me all the time, she said, but she couldn't help glancing toward Jacob's table. Jacob hadn't said a word to her about dancing since she'd turned down his invitation all those months ago, but he did seem to find lots of reasons to walk past her sewing machine, to ride in the same elevator with her, morning and evening. Even halfway across the room, she could instantly pick out his figure in the cluster of Cutters standing around laughing and talking and smoking. Jacob was bent over the table, smoothing out the layers of lawn fabric ready to be cut first thing Monday morning. There had to be at least 120 layers of the gauzy fabric spread across the table, each one separated from the others by sheer tissue paper. Jacob handled it all so gently, almost lovingly. Above his head, the tissue paper patterns dangled from wires, so when he stood up, it was like watching someone across a forest, half hidden by hanging moss and low branches. Suddenly, Jacob and the other Cutters jumped back. One of the men sprinted over to a shelf on the wall and seized a red fire pail. Jerkily, he raced back and threw the pail of water under one of the tables, at the huge bin of fabric scraps left over from days and days of cutting out shirtwaists. Not again. Those Cutters and their cigarettes, Yetta said scornfully. It was clear what had happened. One of them had dropped a match or a cigarette butt or a still-burning ember into the scrap bin. At least someone was smart enough to keep buckets of water around if the Cutters couldn't be stopped from smoking. But then there was a flash, and Yetta saw the flame jump, from under the table to the top of it. More men grabbed buckets, desperately pouring water onto the flames, but there'd been only 3 buckets on that shelf, so they had to run across the room for more. The water was nothing to the fire. The flames raced the length of the lawn fabric. They sprang up to the dangling paper patterns and danced from one to the next, the patterns writhing down to ash and spitting off more flames. In seconds, the fire had gone from being something to scoff at under a table to a voracious beast ready to engulf the entire room. Beside Yetta, Jenny began to scream. "Stop it! This is a fireproof building!" Yetta yelled at Jenny. "But we're tinder," she remembered. Yetta slammed her hands against Jenny's shoulders and screamed, "Go!" The aisle between the sewing machine tables was narrow, and the wicker baskets where they stacked the shirtwaists kept snagging their skirts. And other girls were blocking the aisle, some screaming and hysterical like Jenny'd been. One girl fainted right at Yetta's feet. Yetta reached down and slapped her, jerked her up. "No time for that," Yetta screamed. "You'll die." Across the room, Yetta saw a spark land in a woman's hair. In seconds, the woman's whole pompadour was aflame. Everyone was screaming, but Yetta thought she could hear this woman's screams above all others. The woman lurched across the room, slammed into one of the windows. No, slammed through. She'd thrown herself out the window. "We're on the 8th floor," Yetta thought numbly, and now it was her turn to freeze in panic and fear. Sparks were flying throughout the room now, landing everywhere. Anyone could be next. Hands grabbed Yetta from behind. "Yetta, come on." It was Jacob. Jacob and Yetta shoved forward toward the Washington Place stairs, pulling along Jenny and the girl who'd fainted. Yetta glanced back once more and was relieved to see that Mr. Bernstein, the factory manager, had had some of the men pull a fire hose out of the Green Street stairwell. He stood over the worst of the flames, pointing the hose confidently. No water came out. "Turn it on! Turn it on!" Mr. Bernstein was screaming. Yetta wasn't sure if she could hear him or if she was just reading his lips. "Where is the water?" he screamed again. Not a drop. He flung down the hose and ran. Now Mr. Bernstein was rushing through the crowds of girls, some still heading toward the cloakroom to get their hats. "Don't worry about your hats," he screamed. "Just get out." He was slapping and punching the girls, beating them as though he blamed them for the fire. No, he was goading them toward the doors, toward the elevators and the fire escape. He was only slapping the hysterical girls, like Yetta had done with the girl who'd fainted. He was trying to save their lives. "We're on the same side now, Mr. Bernstein and me," Yetta marveled. She shoved against a girl who'd dropped her purse, who'd seen her coins roll under the table. "Don't stop for that!" Yetta screamed. "It's not worth it! Save your life!" She and Jacob, together, pulled the girl up, lifting her past the table toward the door. There were already dozens of other girls crowded around the door, screaming in Yiddish and English and what Yetta now recognized as Italian. "Open it! Open it! Oh, please, for the love of God! Madonna mia, aiutami!" But it was locked. Some of the girls were pounding on the elevator door, too, screaming for the elevator operator to come to them. Miraculously, the elevator door opened, and the crowd surged forward sobbing and praying and screaming. Just wait, I'll come right back," the operator hollered. The doors were closing, but Yetta shoved Jenny forward, shoving her on top of the girls already in the elevator, saving her, at least. "Will he come back?" Yetta asked Jacob, and Jacob shrugged. Yetta couldn't just stand there and wait. She wasn't going to stand still while the flames raced toward her, while others pressed their faces against a door that might never open. She grabbed Jacob's hand and pulled him along, circling around the fire. She looked back once and saw that someone had managed to open the door to the Washington Place stairs. The door opened in, toward the crowd. Maybe it hadn't been locked after all. Maybe it was just the weight of the crowd pushing forward, pinning it shut. But it was too late to go back now. Flames were shooting across the path they'd just crossed, speeding across the oiled floor, licking up shirtwaists and fabric scraps and wicker baskets. The air itself seemed to be on fire, the flames living on fabric dust. "Fire escape," Yetta moaned to Jacob, and it was so hot now that her words felt like flames themselves, painful on her tongue. "No good," Jacob mumbled back. "Doesn't go all the way to the ground." So they didn't head for the window near the air shaft where people were climbing out one at a time onto the rickety metal railing. What was left? "Green Street stairs," Jacob whispered. Those were back by the table where the fire had started, where it now burned the fiercest. But there was a partition wall blocking off the stairs and the elevator from the rest of the room. On a normal workday, that was where the guard sat, inspecting purses and glaring at the girls as if he thought they were all thieves. Today, maybe, that partition was enough to keep the fire away from the stairs. Yetta and Jacob raced on, skirting the flames, still pulling along hysterical, senseless workers who didn't seem to know where to go. They passed a desk where the bookkeeper, Miss Lipschitz, was shouting into the mouthpiece of a telephone. "Please, somebody listen! Somebody's got to tell the 9th floor! Hello? Somebody, please!" A spark landed on the sleeve of Yetta's shirtwaist, and she watched in horror as it sputtered and shimmered and burned straight through. She could feel it singeing her skin. Jacob slapped his bare hand onto Yetta's sleeve, starving the flame. "A dunk," Yetta whispered, but there was no time for him to say "you're welcome," because they were at the doorway to the partition now, shoving their way behind it. No flames here. Girls were still standing by the freight elevator door, the only elevator they were normally allowed to use. They were pounding on the closed door like they thought that was their only chance. It was so hot behind the partition that Yetta could barely breathe. Can people melt? She wondered. In her mind, she saw wax dripping down from Sabbath candles. My life, melting away. "Stairs!" Jacob screamed at the girls by the elevator door. He jerked open the stairway door and it opened out, making another obstacle in the tiny vestibule. Yetta and Jacob shoved the girls through the doorway and scrambled in behind them. The stairway was airless and close and still hot, but there were no sparks flying through the air. Through the window in the stairwell, Yetta could see the workers scrambling down the fire escape, teetering precariously on the metal railings, struggling past the metal shutters. "Hurry!" Yetta screamed at the girls around her. They were sobbing hysterically, clutching the railing, clutching each other. They were yammering away in some language Yetta didn't recognize, or maybe it wasn't a language at all, just witless jabbering. "The fire," one of them managed to say. "What if it's everywhere?" "There's no smoke coming from down there," Yetta screamed at them, pointing at the landings below them. "Go down to the ground. You'll be safe. The flames are going up, not down." Up. Yetta glanced up to the landing above her, remembering what the bookkeeper had been screaming into the phone. "Somebody listen. Somebody's got to tell the 9th floor." They didn't know. One flight up on the 9th floor where 250 girls worked, where Yetta had worked before the strike, where Bella worked now. Up there, they had no idea there was an inferno raging beneath them, eating up the air, climbing higher and higher and higher. Almost on their own, Yetta's feet had already started slapping down the stairs, once she finally got the jabbering girls moving. But now she stopped. Bella, she thought, my other friends, my sisters, my comrades, my union. "What are you doing?" Jacob screamed, already 3 steps down. "Somebody has to tell the 9th floor," she screamed back. "I have to." She turned around and began clattering up the stairs.
Jane. "Papa's taking us shopping! Papa's taking us shopping!" Harriet chanted, bouncing up and down joyously in the elevator on the way to Mr. Blank's office at the Triangle Factory. "Hush! Everybody knows that," Millicent said scornfully. "She's just excited," Jane said mildly. She patted Harriet's shoulder, trying to calm her down, and gave Millicent and the elevator operator a sympathetic smile. Harriet's chanting was a bit maddening, but, as always, it was hard to know the best way to handle the girls. Miss Milhouse would have scolded Harriet soundly. She would have taken it as her personal mission to stifle the little girl's exuberant personality. And she would have praised Millicent to the skies for her tidiness, her aversion to noise and mess, her ability to sit or stand still practically forever without squirming or exclaiming. Personally, Jane thought Millicent was in danger of becoming a priggish bore, and she worried that someday somebody would stifle Harriet's exuberance. "Make it be like a stream," Bella had advised her when Jane had asked for help. "You don't want to chop her off. Bam!" She'd slam the side of her right hand against her left palm, but make it go a good way. "You mean I should try to channel her enthusiasm into positive outlets?" Jane asked. After Jane explained what channel, enthusiasm, positive, and outlets meant, Bella grinned and nodded. Yes, exactly. You say what is in my heart for that girl." Now, as the elevator zoomed upward, Harriet began tugging on the elevator operator's jacket. "Mister, you didn't know we were going shopping, did you? Papa's taking us as a treat because our mama went to Florida for the, what's it called? Social season, and she took the car with her on the train. So we had to take a taxi cab to get here, and the taxi cab's still waiting outside for us to come back. Except Mademoiselle Michaud's not going shopping with us, just Papa and—" "Harriet," Jane said warningly. "She's okay," the elevator operator said. "You're the Blank girls, right? The boss's daughters?" "Our Papa and Uncle Isaac own the whole factory," Millicent bragged. "They employ more than 700 people. Millicent," Jane shot the girl a reproving look. "Remember what I've told you about bragging?" she wanted to scold. But she'd always hated Miss Milhouse correcting her in front of other people, so she'd vowed not to do that to Millicent or Harriet. It was just really tempting at times like this. First thing Monday morning, I need to have a little talk with both girls. The elevator was gathering speed. Harriet clutched Jane's hand. "What if the elevator goes all the way through the roof?" she asked. "Silly, that would never happen," Millicent scoffed. "Why not?" Because it wouldn't be proper," Millicent said. She lowered her voice as if that would keep the elevator operator from hearing. "If we went through the roof, the people below us could see up our skirts." The elevator operator's face turned red. He was trying so hard not to laugh. Jane sighed. "There are scientific reasons the elevator would never go through the roof," she said, "because of how the elevator's made, how it works." "How does it work?" Harriet asked. Oops. Jane had been afraid she'd ask that. Somehow elevator mechanics had not been in the curriculum at Jane's finishing school. Next week, we can go to the bookstore and find a book that explains it all, Jane said. Or maybe you can find one with your papa. The elevator runs on a cable, the operator said. The cable goes up to gears, and those are on the roof. Maybe sometime you can ask your papa to show you the gearbox. But if you want to go to the roof, you have to use the Green Street stairs. That's the only way to get there. Thank you, Jane said, smiling gratefully at the operator. He was a pimply boy, maybe a little younger than her. A year ago, he would have been completely invisible to her, but now she wondered about his life. Which country had he come from? Did he bring his family with him, or was he all alone? Was he supporting a widowed mother and a younger brother and sister or two on his salary as an elevator operator? Did Mr. Blank and Mr. Harris pay him more or less than they paid their sewing machine operators? 10th floor, the operator announced, bringing the elevator to a halt and sweeping open the barred door. Where your papa, the boss, works. He had the slightest hint of mockery in his voice, just enough for Jane to hear. He even gave her a conspiratorial wink, which was much too forward, but somehow Jane didn't mind. She winked back and stepped out onto the polished wood floor of a spacious reception area. Miss Mary! Miss Mary! Harriet cried, running over to one of the desks. Oh, sweetie, Miss Mary's busy right now, said the short, frazzled-looking woman behind the desk. The switchboard operator didn't come in today, so Miss Mary has to do all her typing and connect every call that comes in. The 8th floor can't even call the 9th floor without my help. Harriet inspected the telephone switchboard behind the woman's desk, the wires hanging slack. So if you plug in this wire here, then... Oh, sweetie, don't touch, Miss Mary said, gently pushing Harriet's hand away. I really don't have time. I'll explain it to you some other day. She looked up at Jane. You're the governess, right? You can just take them into Mr. Blank's office and then go tell him they're here. Where is Mr. Blank? Jane asked. Oh, he was just down on the 9th floor. No, wait, back in the storeroom? I'm sorry. I'd look for him myself, but... The harried secretary gestured at the papers strewn across her desk, the bill poking out from her typewriter. A contraption beside the typewriter buzzed, and Miss Mary looked over at it expectantly. What's that? Harriet whispered. Oh, it's the new telautograph, Miss Mary said. The latest in business machinery is how it's advertised. Looks like there's a message coming from the 8th floor. They write something on a pad of paper downstairs, and this pen is supposed to write the same thing on this pad right here. Like magic, Harriet breathed. The pen didn't move. It'd be magic if it ever worked right, Miss Mary snorted. Probably isn't anything anyhow, just the girls downstairs playing with it on their way out the door. Miss Mary turned back to her typing, and Jane shooed the girls toward Mr. Blank's office. I want to go see the showroom, Harriet said, skipping down the hall. Mademoiselle Michaud, you'll love it. You can see all the latest fashions before Paris. That's because even Paris doesn't know as much about fashion as our papa, Millicent said, agreeing with her younger sister for once. Some other time, Jane said. Miss Mary said to wait in his office, remember? They turned in at a doorway, but the sign on the door said Isaac Harris, not Max Blank. Uncle Isaac, Harriet called. A man behind a desk waved, but there was another man with him, a dapper-looking gentleman, holding up samples of delicate embroidery. Jane flashed an apologetic look at Mr. Harris and pulled the girls away. Look, you can see into the pressing department from here, Harriet said, pointing past a break in the wall into a vast open space where rows and rows of weary-looking workers stood over ironing boards. Each one of the irons was connected to the ceiling by an odd array of tubes. Is Papa afraid those workers are going to steal his irons? Harriet asked. Is that why the irons are tied up? Jane didn't have the slightest idea, so she was glad that Millicent answered first. No, silly. The The gas comes down those tubes and heats the irons, Millicent said. Papa says we must never ever go in there because one of those irons could blister our skin in an instant. And does he care at all about the workers operating the irons? Jane wondered bitterly. Some of them look no older than Millicent. Quick now, she told the girls. Into the office. Wait right there. She was infected suddenly with some of Miss Mary's franticness, or maybe she was just tired of hearing the admiring tone in the girls' voices every time they mentioned their papa. Or maybe it was the sight of the haggard workers hunched over their irons, girls who looked entirely too young, who would probably look entirely too old after just a year or two on the job. Regardless, Jane was ready to be done working for the day, ready to be out in the fresh air, arm in arm with Bella and Yetta. She was pretty sure that she and Bella had finally convinced Yetta to go with them to visit Rahel and Rahel's new baby. It would probably be a touching family reunion. Yes, Yetta will be so much happier if she'll just forgive her sister for getting married, Jane thought. My father and I, on the other hand. She hadn't forgotten her promise to Mr. Corrigan to write her father a letter. She'd written him many, many letters, actually. She'd just torn them all up. What is there to say? Jane pulled the door shut on Millicent and Harriet, catching barely a glimpse of Mr. Blank's imposing mahogany desk, of the lovely arched windows behind the desk. Harriet was scrambling into the huge leather chair. Harriet! A young lady would never put her feet up on the desk, she heard Millicent cry out in scandalized horror. Jane decided to let Millicent wage that battle on her own. Secretly, she was thinking, oh, Harriet, maybe you should go on being the kind of girl who puts her feet on desks. Better that than hiding under them. She scurried down the hall, back to the double elevator doors. She decided to look for Mr. Blank on the 9th floor first. She knew that was where Bella worked, and it'd be good if she could warn Bella that she'd be a few minutes late getting out to the street, especially if it took her a long time to find Mr. Blank. Passing Miss Mary's desk, Jane was surprised to notice that the woman had vanished, leaving the telephone receiver hanging off the hook. That's odd. She seemed like such a conscientious sort. A different elevator operator came up this time, a swarthily handsome Italian man. If Bella's precious Pietro looks anything like that, no wonder she can't forget him, Jane thought. Then she had to hide her face so he didn't see her giggling at her own wickedness. The elevator buzzed annoyingly, again and again and again. 8th floor's going crazy, the elevator operator growled. He scowled at the panel of lights that kept flashing at him as he shut the door behind Jane, and the elevator began its descent. Hold on a minute, I'm coming. They've probably all got spring fever, Jane said, and it's Saturday. Yeah, the operator grumbled, letting her out on the 9th floor. But do they gotta take it out on me? The 9th floor was not what Jane expected. After the cleanliness and elegance of the 10th floor, she wasn't prepared for this dim, dirty space with the tables and the machines and the girls packed in so tightly together. The room was huge, but the tables stretched from one side of the building to the other. By the windows, there wasn't even space to walk around the tables. And shirtwaists and shirtwaist parts were piled everywhere, mountains of fabric by each machine. No wonder Bella felt so overwhelmed coming here from her tiny little village in Italy, Jane thought. Jane herself felt a little overwhelmed. Excuse me, do you know where I could find Mr. Blank or Bella Rossetti? She asked the girl at the nearest sewing machine. The girl looked up blankly and said something that might have been, I don't speak English, in some other language. Just then a bell sounded and the machine stopped, and hundreds of girls sprang up from their machines all at once. It spooked Jane a little. The darkness of the room and the foreign jabbering and the girls moving like machines themselves. But then one of the girls stepping out of the cloakroom began to sing. Every little movement has a meaning of its own. One of those popular songs that you heard everywhere nowadays. Some of the other girls joined in, and they all seemed so light-hearted suddenly. Saturday afternoon, and the sun was shining and work was over. These girls looked happier than anyone Jane had ever seen at a formal ball. Then, 2 tables away, Jane spotted Bella heading down the aisle between the tables and laughing and talking to the girls around her. "Jane, what are you doing here?" Bella shouted over to her. "Looking for you and Mr. Blank," Jane said. "Well, we wouldn't be together," Bella called back merrily. Jane worked her way through the crowd toward her friend. She explained about Millicent and Harriet and the shopping and how long it would take her to get down to the sidewalk. Then Bella said, "Oh, wait, you have to meet my friends. This is Annie and Dora and Josie and Essie and Ida. And come here." She pulled her back down the aisle between the tables. "This is my boss, Signor Carlotti. This is my friend Jane Wellington, Signor Carlotti, and she knows proper Italian and proper English." "Hello," Signor Carlotti said. "I am a factory inspector," Jane said, suddenly inspired to lie. "If I were to interview the girls in this factory, would they tell me that you treat them with respect? Are you fair to all your workers?" At the first word out of her mouth, Signor Carlotti's face changed. First to awe at her upper-class accent, then to fear. "Oh, yes, of course," Signor Carlotti exclaimed. It was all Jane and Bella could do not to double over giggling as they walked away. "Maybe he really will change how he treats you Monday morning," Jane whispered. "Oh, do you think so?" Bella asked wistfully. Across the room, strangely, Jane heard Yetta's voice now. She couldn't make out the words, but Yetta seemed to be calling out in great excitement from the midst of the crowd of girls getting ready to leave. Maybe she was talking them into another strike. Maybe this one would work. Maybe Yetta would get her dearest wish. "Doesn't Yetta work on the 8th floor?" Jane asked. Before Bella could answer, screams came suddenly from the back of the room. Screams and a great burst of light.
Bella. Bella couldn't tell what had happened. It was just like her first day of work when everyone else was yelling and running and knocking over baskets and trampling shirtwaists they didn't bother to stop and pick up. And for a moment, just like on that first day, Bella couldn't understand the words everyone else kept saying. The English part of her brain shut off. The Yiddish words in her brain evaporated. Even the Italian she heard around her sounded garbled and foreign. Then she smelled smoke, and the words made sense. "Fire! Esprent! Fuego!" Jane clutched her shoulders. "Where do we go? What do we do?" Jane asked. "We always had fire drills at school. Where have they told you to go in the event of a fire?" Bella didn't know what a fire drill was. People were crowded in all around her, shoving and pushing from behind, blocking the way in front of her. The tables on either side of the aisle seemed to be closing in on her. She was penned in, just like a goat or a pig. No better than an animal, Bella thought. And somehow this seemed all of a piece with not being able to read and wanting only food, and Signor Carlotti spitting on her and Signor Luciano cheating her. "I bet back home your family slept with goats and chickens in the house," Signora Luciano had sneered at her once, and Bella hadn't even understood that that was an insult. But now, she'd seen how other people lived. She'd seen what Jane and Yetta expected out of life. She refused to think of herself as a hog in a pen waiting to be slaughtered. "This way," she said, grabbing Jane's hand and scrambling up on top of the nearest table. From there, she could see the fire. It was blowing in the back window, one huge ball of flame rolling across the examining tables stacked with shirtwaists. The flames kept dividing, devouring stack after stack of shirtwaists, racing each other down the tables. Where are they trying to get to? Bella wondered. The first flame leaped from the examining table to the first row of sewing tables. "It's coming toward us!" Jane screamed behind her. "Where do we go?" Bella looked around frantically. Girls were packed in around the doors and elevators. Only a handful seemed to remember that there was another way out. "The fire escape!" Bella screamed back, grateful for that day so long ago before the strike when she'd actually seen where the fire escape was. The aisles were still crowded. Bella leaped from one table to the next, and somehow Jane managed to follow. Bella leaped again, suddenly sure-footed. Except for the smoke burning her eyes and throat, she could have been back in the mountains near Kalia, jumping from rock to rock. "I've got to make sure Harriet and Millicent are all right," Jane panted behind her, as they cleared another table. She began coughing, choking on the smoke. Bella bent down and snatched up a pile of shirtwaist sleeves. She held 2 over her mouth and handed the others to Jane. "Here, so you can breathe." They kept racing across the tables, and it really was a race, because the flames were speeding toward the fire escape window, too. Through the smoke, Bella could barely make out the progress of the fire. "The flames are going to get there first. No, we are. No, look how fast the fire's moving." They reached the end of the tables and jumped down to the floor. The flames were reaching for Bella's skirt, so she lifted it up as she ran for the fire escape. She had one leg out the window, balanced on the metal railing, when Jane grabbed for her arm. "Wait! Is that safe?" Jane asked. She'd actually stopped to peer down at the rickety stairs, at the flames shooting out the 8th-floor window, at the 8th-floor shutters that seemed to be blocking the path of all the other girls already easing their way down. "Safe?" Bella repeated numbly. Anything seemed safer than where they were now, but she pulled back a little, reconsidering. She shifted her weight back from the foot that was on the fire escape to the knee perched on the windowsill, and in that moment, the fire escape just fell away. "Madonna mia!" Bella cried. Jane grabbed her, pulling her back in through the window. "The other girls!" Jane shook her head, maybe meaning, "Don't ask." Maybe meaning, "I saw it all, them falling. I can't even begin to tell you how awful it was." Bella tried to remember who'd been ahead of her on the fire escape. Dora? Essie? Ida? All of them? The boot of the girl immediately in front of Bella had had a fancy silver buckle. The kind of thing a girl would have been proud of. The kind of thing she would have gone around showing off, making sure her skirt flounced up to display it as much as possible. Had Bella seen that buckle before? "Bella! Where's another exit?" Jane cried out. But Bella couldn't think about anything but a fancy silver buckle. Suddenly, Yetta was there. "Green Street stairs!" Yetta was screaming. "Go!" Bella grabbed her friend's hands and took off running again, but Yetta pulled her hand back. "You go on!" she screamed. "I still have to." The rest of Yetta's words were lost in the crackle of advancing flames. The smoke rose and fell and shifted. 1 minute Bella could see ahead of her, a straight path to the partition by the door. The next minute she was groping blindly forward, tripping over people who had fallen. She'd dropped the shirtwaist sleeves she'd been using to cover her mouth and nose. She grabbed up another stack, but just before she pressed it to her face, she noticed that these shirtwaist sleeves were already burning. She dropped them to the floor and began to sag toward the floor herself. But she was still holding Jane's hand. Jane yanked her back up. "The stairs!" Jane gasped. They stumbled forward. Bella pulled her wool skirt up over her head, blocking out the smoke and the flames. Immodest, she thought. An English word she'd just learned. She didn't care. Jane grabbed a bucket of water from a nearby shelf and flung it toward the fire, and some of it splashed back onto Bella. None of it seemed to reach the fire, or if it did, it didn't make any difference. The flames kept shooting forward. There were no more buckets left on the shelf, only some tipped over empty on the floor. "The girls will be so scared," Jane breathed, and Bella knew she meant Harriet and Millicent waiting in their father's office upstairs. "I've got to—" She stopped, looking down. "My skirt," she said. A ring of flames was dancing along the bottom of her skirt. She stepped forward and the flames flared. "We'll put it out," Bella said. Jane began rushing toward a vat by the stairs. "Water! No, no! That's machine oil! Sewing machine oil!" Bella screamed, pulling her back. The dark oil was bubbling over, running down the sides of the vat. The fire was beginning to race along the streams of oil. Bella had to jump past it, and then Jane was on one side of the flames, Bella on the other. "Jane!" Bella screamed. "Go on!" Jane screamed back. "Go! Get the girls! Make sure they're safe up there!" "But you—" "I'll go another way," Jane said. "I'll meet you later." Bella whirled around. The pathway to the stairs was closing in. In a second, it would be gone. Bella ran forward.